gene editing. That phrase alone can sound like our salvation. Just flip the right genetic switches and we could obliterate thousands of cruel disorders overnight, from fibrodysplasia, where your muscles literally turn to bone, to progeria, where kids grow old before they've even lived. Today, more than 6,000 genetic diseases are known. A measly 600 have any real treatment. Close to a quarter of the world's population carries at least one faulty gene. The obvious fix is to yank out the defect at its source, right? But in 2016, the US intelligence community officially lumped genome editing in with weapons of mass destruction. Yes, alongside nukes and nerve gas. Why? Because in 2012, CRISPR-Cas9 landed. Suddenly, practically anyone with a halfway decent lab and some YouTube tutorials can slice and dice DNA, cheaply, quickly, and discreetly. It used to take massive resources and super sophisticated labs to cook up biological agents. Now, synthetic biology can churn out gene-modified horrors fast, from pandemic-tier pathogens to frankenviruses for which no vaccine exists. The National Academy of Sciences hammered out a 221-page paper for the US military, trying to size up all these new CRISPR threats. And sure, they talked about engineered viruses, conjuring deadlier smallpox knockoffs, unstoppable E. coli, all that Hollywood doomsday stuff. But that's child's play compared to what might loom over the horizon. Gene editing taps the source code of everything alive. We're not just flirting with scarier viruses. We're flirting with rewriting the blueprint of entire species, maybe even our own. So if you think lab-brewed pathogens are the worst-case scenario, you might be missing the bigger picture. Let's step back a bit, push our imaginations further, and see why some people see CRISPR-Cas9 as a cure, and others see it as the scariest Pandora's box we've ever cracked open. Take a good hard look at what's hitting your eyeballs right now. Probably a jolt of aesthetic pleasure. We eat this stuff up, gawking at pretty faces like we're starving for them. But let's ask, what the hell is a beautiful face anyway? People love to say beauty's in the eye of the beholder, that it's all subjective, that different ages, different eras, different cultures see it differently. Wrong. When it comes to faces, science shows that across time, place, age, or tradition, folks lock onto the same faces as the most attractive. A beautiful face is a universal concept. Francis Galton, the mind behind composite portraits, where he also tried to sniff out the facial traits of violent criminals, noticed something that quite literally grabs your attention. In case you missed my earlier mention of his technique in A New Era of Humanity Has Begun, here's the gist. Galton would overlay multiple criminal mugshots, fusing them into one averaged face. Oddly enough, each single mugshot looked way less appealing than that blended composite. Layering them all together seemed to produce some sort of ideal face, like they were all straining for a higher standard. So, what's going on here? Your face is a massive deal, so vital that evolution trained us to judge another person's looks in 1/10 of a second. We don't even try. It's all autopilot, wired into the oldest parts of our brain. Then, in hindsight, we rationalize, telling ourselves we liked so-and-so for their sparkling personality or robust charisma. But the real story? A beautiful face is a marker. A marker of what? Why the devil does a pretty face look pretty? There are loads of theories, but the most plausible is that good-looking features are tied to genes that have proven themselves through the brutal tests of evolution. When we see a composite face, we're seeing a trustworthy average hammered out by millennia. Extreme deviations? They're risky, like aiming way off the bullseye when you should be nailing the center. Talk about attractiveness in general, and let's be real, good looks open every door. Attractive people get more trust, are perceived as more competent, their good traits get spotlighted, and they tend to rake in more cash. Worst part? Even small kids get a taste of this favoritism. Beautiful children literally receive extra love and care from their parents. Life just hands the hotties a loaded deck. So you ever resent certain parts of your appearance you can't just fix? Because let's face it, if you lack the right genes, you're not gracing catwalks any more than a 150-centimeter basketball player is making an NBA roster. Sure, every book, movie, or motivational guru screams, hard work can make you great, hooking on to the legends of star athletes who hammered themselves into stardom. and that we can do the same, but no, alas, we can't. In his book, The Sports Gene, David Epstein tells the story of Eero Mantaranta, a Finnish cross-country skiing legend who bagged 7 Olympic medals, 3 gold, and 2 world championships between 1960 and 1972. The man had grit to spare, but he also carried a genetic quirk that pumped out way more hemoglobin than normal, boosting the oxygen supply to his muscles and giving him extraordinary endurance. Sure, success in sports is complex. Diet, coaching, opportunity, luck, all matter. But that doesn't erase the fact that a single gene can still be pivotal. Take ACTN3, one of the few known genes tied to muscle contraction speed. Switch it off in mice, and muscle strength plummets. In humans, if both copies of ACTN3 are broken, you can kiss any shot at sprinting glory goodbye. On the other hand, a mutation in MSTN can knock out myostatin, the protein that holds muscle growth in check. People born with this genetic glitch bulk up almost effortlessly, as if the body has cancelled its usual resource rationing rules. That German baby in a 2004 study who looked like a mini bodybuilder at just 7 months old, or Liam Hoekstra from the US, who started doing pull-ups before he was even a year old. Similar myostatin-free mutations in animals yield ultra-ripped mice, dogs, and cattle, lean, muscular frames with minimal fat. Wouldn't you be tempted by a mutation that practically builds muscle for you, especially in an age of abundant calories? The catch is, it's not just about muscles. Your genes also set upper limits for mental ability, reaction time, memory, and more. Yes, training and good habits help maximize what you've got, but you can't vault beyond your response norm. That's the genetically determined range in which you can develop. Hard work and diet matter, but in the end, your genes are the ones quietly stamping the ceiling on how far you can go. As psychogeneticist Robert Plowman said, if a child has a weak memory, it is likely that it will remain weak. No matter how hard teachers and parents fight, he will not grow up to be the world's best mathematician. And if genes mean so much in human life, genome editing, at least in the long run, is inevitable, and not just in the case of inherited diseases. Do you want your child to grow up smart? Doesn't anyone? We honestly don't have a foolproof way to boost intelligence, at least not as measured by IQ tests, which, by the way, stay strikingly consistent over a person's lifetime. And the older you get, the more your IQ seems to hinge on genetics. So many of the brainy tricks that helped our ancestors survive, memory, pattern recognition, language, math, are tightly woven together. Score high in one, you usually score high in them all. That's the rationale behind measuring an overall intelligence factor. But here's the kicker. Multiple studies show that IQ tightly correlates with health, education level, career success, and even lifespan. It's not always a straight line. Smart people can still wind up broke and out of luck, but generally speaking, a higher IQ opens more doors. We often downplay genetics in this. How many times have you heard, "You're just being lazy, pull yourself together," without considering that some folks genuinely struggle with tasks others breeze through? Hard work matters, sure, but let's not ignore 4 billion years of brutal evolutionary fine-tuning. That's how we got our biology, with all its built-in range of potential. Then CRISPR and other gene editing tools showed up, flipping evolution's script. As Jamie Metzl explains in Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering and the Future of Humanity. Metzl, a techno-futurist writer and Atlantic Council senior fellow, knows a thing or two about big moves in science. If predicting the future usually feels ridiculous, remember Kennedy in '62, pledging a moon landing before 1970. Most of the required tech already existed. Rockets, heat shields, life support systems, computers that could crunch the numbers. All that was needed was refinement, funding, and political will. The inevitable was obvious, and it happened a mere 7 years later. Now the genetic reworking of humanity isn't far-fetched sci-fi anymore. In fact, it's already well underway, slipping past most people's radars. Why? Because the public's grasp of science inches along slowly, while science itself rockets forward at an exponential clip. We're faced with a rapidly evolving toolkit that can rewrite the very code of life, and we're only just starting to realize it. According to Jamie Metzl, The future I'm about to lay out isn't science fiction. It's inevitable. We've already got all the tools on the table. The only real question is how soon it becomes reality. A few decades? A century? Because 100 years from now, nobody in the developed world is going to be having babies the old way. The writing's on the wall. Does that sound radical? Maybe as radical as the birth of Louise Brown in 1978, who was splashed across headlines as the child of the century. She wasn't some miracle of nature. She was the first human conceived through in vitro fertilization, IVF. Today, plenty of folks shrug that off as a godsend for infertile couples. But back then, people mailed the Browns blood-splattered packages stuffed with plastic embryo. Religious authorities denounced IVF as an abomination. It was unnatural. Here's a newsflash. What's natural versus unnatural is a lot murkier than most people think. Consider corn 9,000 years back. It looked nothing like the big yellow cobs we devour today. Same for carrots, eggplants, watermelons, bananas. Humans transformed them through painstaking breeding. That is, massive genetic tinkering on a millennia-long timescale. Even the most organic produce in a hipster grocery store is the outcome of our relentless modifications. Face it, agriculture itself is a monumental, worldwide genetic modification project. And look at how we treat diseases. If you caught a nasty bacterial infection, are you going to rely on natural berries and incantations or get pumped full of life-saving antibiotics? We keep telling ourselves to live in harmony with nature, but let's get real. Nature's been trying to kill us from day one. 100,000 years ago, you'd have been easy pickings for predators. Humans don't have claws or fangs worth a damn, but we do have an enhanced phenotype. Spears, bows, guns, walls, all the tools and weapons that turned us into top dogs on this planet. The safe, modern environment we enjoy is the result of centuries of telling nature no thanks, forging farmland, building cities, squashing disease. Which brings us back to IVF. Since Louise Brown's birth in 1978, more than 8 million children have been born that way. The wailing about their unnaturalness died out once people realized, hey, these kids are just fine. In the United States, about 1.5% of babies now come from IVF, and in Japan that figure's nearer 5%. If you think IVF is still niche and optional, brace yourself. It's likely to get a lot more common. Yes, today it's expensive, physically taxing, and not exactly guaranteed, but that will change, and once it does, having a child the old-fashioned way might be condemned as irresponsible, much like refusing to vaccinate your kids is frowned upon now. Why? Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, PGD, which kicked off in 1990, 12 years after Louise Brown, the first IVF baby, was born. PGD lets doctors test embryos for certain genetic diseases before they're implanted. Then parents can choose the healthiest embryo and sidestep nasty disorders. On the surface, that's a no-brainer. But where do you draw the line between preventing disease and cherry-picking desirable traits? If you can dodge congenital muscular dystrophy, why not pick an embryo that's primed for extra muscle mass? We're already inching over that blurry boundary. Plenty of American clinics offer embryo screening not just to avoid specific genetic flaws, but simply to pick the baby's sex. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Some clinics actually let parents with dwarfism or deafness deliberately select embryos with the genes for dwarfism or deafness, so the child shares those traits. Right or wrong? Morally, it's complicated, but it's definitely happening. Meanwhile, conditions like Down syndrome caused by an extra copy of chromosome 21, leading to heart issues, cognitive challenges, and elevated cancer risk, could become far rarer through embryo screening. In short, as IVF and genetic testing keep improving, society may start pressuring would-be parents to use them. What begins as, I only want to avoid a lethal disease, can slide straight into, I want a baby with these specific characteristics. And that changes the entire conversation around what's natural and ethical in having a child. Life doesn't have neat little lines in the sand. Just look at Down syndrome. A lot of these kids end up living perfectly satisfying lives, even uplifting the people around them. Their families swear they're a blessing. Meanwhile, in places like Iceland, Once prenatal testing for Down syndrome became routine and government-funded, almost every woman who tested positive ended her pregnancy. Denmark, Australia, China, the UK, same story. 90 to 98% abortion rates, and this is the big moral earthquake. Even in the United States, where the mere idea of abortion can start holy wars, 67% of expectant parents chose to terminate once they learned their fetus had Down syndrome. That's even though a 2007 poll showed just 20% of Americans openly support abortion for non-fatal genetic conditions. It's easy to be all high-minded until a decision lands on your kitchen table. Now fast forward to a scenario where parents don't have to undergo the moral agony of abortion. All they do is pick an embryo in a dish. No mess, no fuss. If we can weed out Down syndrome embryos for the sake of less suffering, why not choose the embryo with, say, the best shot at sky-high IQ? Studies say high IQ usually means more money, better health, and longer life. Of course, parents will want the brainiest embryo in the batch. But how far can that go? To see what's possible, look at the ancestors of the modern chicken. Gallus used to lay only one egg a month. Then humans came along and turned them into egg machines, pumping out 300 eggs a year, 25 times the original rate. That's just the power of selective breeding. If you think humans are somehow above that, you're dreaming. The rules of biology apply to us just like they do chickens. In principle, we could optimize ourselves the same way and just as quickly were it not for a few pesky constraints like ethics, social taboos, and time. Because let's face it, we can't churn out new generations of people in 6 months like poultry. We take decades to mature, which puts a serious damper on any big eugenic scheme. Still, the moral lines are shifting, and as soon as embryo selection for normal traits becomes routine, the conversation about picking for enhanced traits is only a hop, skip, and a CRISPR away. The main speed bump is that humans breed painfully slowly, so you won't see dramatic leaps in a single generation. But make no mistake, we've already started hacking our biology. What's coming next might be more chicken coop than starry-eyed utopia. Imagine this bombshell. We shorten the human reproductive cycle to 6 months, chicken style. Right now, a man can crank out limitless sperm, but each woman can only cough up maybe 10 or 15 viable eggs in an IVF cycle. That's your max, 15 embryos to choose from. But what if we turn that into hundreds of possible embryos for each couple? All thanks to stem cells. Take a normal skin or blood cell, coax it into a stem cell, coax it into an egg. Suddenly, a future mother doesn't just have a small handful of eggs, she's got heaps of them. Yeah, it sounds straight out of sci-fi, but you're dreaming if you think our species will toss aside a technology that can wipe out genetic diseases, up our lifespans, and bulk up our immunity to half the nastiness nature throws at us. Look at our track record. We embrace every tool that's even halfway beneficial, from explosives to nuclear fission to anabolic steroids to plastic surgery. Moral squeamishness is never enough to slam the brakes when the upside is so huge. Cue embryo screening on a colossal scale, because let's face it, once you can weed out lethal genetic time bombs or slash the odds of cancer, who's going to gamble their kid's future on a random roll of the DNA dice? Nobody wants to be the one whose neighbor says, "Your child died from a preventable disease?" That's on you. You'll start crossing off everything, genes tied to depression, schizophrenia, even borderline stuff like higher chances of diabetes. And after that, you bet parents will start checking boxes for traits that correlate with a healthier, longer life, including a shot at a higher IQ. Sure, some people say it's naive to predict intelligence from genes. The genetic puzzle for IQ is massive, just like the hundreds of genes that factor into height. Yet Stephen Su, a theoretical physicist and vice president for research at Michigan State, has shown that we can already do rudimentary predictions of height just by scanning known gene variants. Scale that logic up a bit, and soon we'll be scanning for the right combo of IQ genes too. Point is, once it's safe, cheap, and easy, who's gonna say, "Nah, I think I'll just roll the dice with old-fashioned sex, thanks"? The era of flippin' random baby DNA is coming to a close. Maybe it feels cold, maybe it's shocking, But if it can save lives, dodge disability, and prime our offspring for a future on a hotter Earth or out in space, you'd better believe we'll stampede to sign up. Yet Stephen Sue's lab at Michigan State pulled genetic data from 500,000 UK biobank participants to predict people's height purely from their DNA. The result? They nailed it with an error margin of just 2.5 centimeters. That's insane. If we can do that for height, an ostensibly simple trait that still involves hundreds of genes, what's stopping us from applying the same logic to intelligence, or anything else for that matter? Sure, intelligence isn't as easy to measure as centimeters on a ruler, but harder to measure isn't impossible. We've already pinpointed a couple hundred genes tied to above-average IQ, and that's just scratching the surface. The thousands more we haven't found yet may explain the real bulk of humanity's cognitive diversity. But the fact we uncovered any intelligence genes so quickly, in this early stage of genetics, practically shouts we'll keep finding more. Hans Bethe, Nobel Prize winner in physics, said, "I always thought that John von Neumann with his brain belonged to some other species, that it was a clear example of human evolution, and no wonder. Take a look at what and how much von Neumann is known for." American mathematician Hermann Goldstein said, "One of the remarkable features of von Neumann was his capacity for absolute recall. As far as I could tell, von Neumann was able, after reading a book or an article, to quote it verbatim. Moreover, he could do so years later without hesitation. He could also translate them without loss of speed from the original language into English. I once tested his abilities by asking him to remind me how A Tale of Two Cities begins, whereupon, without any pause, von Neumann immediately began reciting the first chapter and continued until about 10 or 15 minutes later he was asked to stop." Shulman and Bostrom ran the numbers on embryo selection for higher IQ. First off, they say that if a regular couple uses IVF like we do right now, maybe 15 embryos to pick from. The difference between the lowest IQ and highest IQ embryo is about 12 points. Go for 1,000, and you're talking a 25-point jump. That might sound underwhelming, just 25 points, but on an IQ test, that's huge. It can mean the difference between slogging through an average life and cruising through life on a wave of accelerated intelligence. But you want the real mind-blower? Crossbreeding embryos. In other words, you produce these top-tier embryos, let them grow a bit, harvest some cells to create new sperm or eggs, then fertilize them again with the next best embryos. Congratulations. Grandma and grandpa become your baby's great-grandparents, and so on, in this half-insane generational hamster wheel of embryo breeding. It sounds like a mad scientist's fever dream, but hey, there's no fundamental law stopping it. Shulman and Bostrom figure that if you cross 5 generations of these carefully curated embryos, each time cherry-picking the top IQ variants out of a big group, you could land a 65-point jump in IQ. 65 points. That's basically the gap between a run-of-the-mill person with an IQ of 100 and a recognized genius at 165, about the same gulf that separates average from severe mental disability. It's breathtaking, it's horrifying, and it's only 5 generations. Make it 10 generations and they predict an IQ bump of 130 points, enough to get from Joe Schmo to Terry Tao, the mathematical Mozart, rumored to have an IQ near 230. That is, to me, for example, the fact that he owns a probability-theoretic strengthening of Simarity's lemma on regularity, or that he proved the circular law in random matrix theory, don't tell me anything at all. Just some set of strange words. All we are able to marvel at is that he took university-level math courses at the age of 9. Or, here's a quote from Princeton University math professor Charles Pfefferman from a New Scientist article about his abilities. Tao's reputation is such that mathematicians now compete for his attention to their problems. He is becoming something of a lifeline for jaded researchers. If you are stuck on a problem, the only way out is to get Tao interested. An IQ of 230 is a lot, literally unthinkable for the likes of us. But American physicist Stephen Shu, the one who predicted the rise by genotype, is even more optimistic about the possible leap in IQ development. Shu believes that within 10 years, we will likely be able to decipher most of the genes that affect intelligence. Therefore, in the future, we could make super-intelligent people with an IQ of around 1,000. Of course, no one has any idea what an IQ of 1,000 could even mean. However, we can be sure that, whatever it means, abilities of this kind would far exceed the maximum ability among the roughly 100 billion people who have ever lived on the planet. We can expect people with extraordinary mental abilities that can manifest simultaneously and at full capacity. Perfect memorization of language and images, ultra-fast thinking and computational ability, the most vivid visualization of geometric space and other dimensions, the ability for multiple analysis, parallel thinking, and the list goes on. Imagine a super genius with an IQ of 1,000. Sure, it sounds awesome until you realize evolution's a delicate balance of trade-offs. Pushing brain power that far might trigger severe psychosis, novel neurological diseases, or who knows what else. And don't forget that every step of crossbreeding embryos, generation after generation, could pile up harmful mutations no one notices until it's too late. But if you think all this talk of fiddling with the human reproductive process, like coaxing embryonic stem cells into sperm or eggs, is outlandish, brace yourself. That tech is already starting to work in the lab. Chinese scientists turned stem cells taken from a mouse egg into sperm cells, then fertilized another female's egg. Result? A healthy offspring, half to each mother. American researchers pulled off something similar with 2 male mice. Yes, a world where same-sex couples can have fully related kids is rushing toward us. And in theory, an individual could even supply both egg and sperm to produce a child that's genetically their own offspring in every sense. Keep in mind, none of this necessarily involves CRISPR or direct gene editing. It could happen with purely untouched human DNA. Yet for all our differences in language or skin color, humans are shockingly genetically alike. Research from Oxford even found more genetic variety in a single group of Central African chimps than among humans across continents. Part of the reason? Our species repeatedly nearly went extinct. Genetic sleuthing suggests that about 1.2 million years ago, humanity's ancestors dipped to just 26,000 individuals, later plummeted to a few hundred, and again to just a few thousand around 70,000 years ago, when ash from a Sumatran supervolcano blocked out the sun. We've been shaped by brutal evolutionary bottlenecks, and the genome is stubbornly conservative. Now, with CRISPR and its cousins, we could brute force changes in a single generation. But there's a hidden minefield. What if we cut or swap out a gene that has some obscure vital function? Side effects might not emerge until later in life, or only in future offspring. Deep Genomics, out of Canada, is a prime example of where things are headed. They're merging AI with genetics to spot patterns in how diseases erupt, because they believe the future of medicine is flat out too complex for the human mind to handle alone. Right now, we barely understand how each gene works, or even what a gene really is. The deeper geneticists dig, the more they realize the very notion of a gene is squishy and debatable. Richard Young at the Whitehead Institute says that 2 decades back, he could explain what a gene is in 2 hours. Now it's 3 months of lectures for the same freshman class. It's not that students got dumber. Biology's just that complicated. But hard isn't the same as infinite. Eventually, our ability to manipulate code might outpace the complexity of our genome. Will we wait for perfect, risk-free knowledge? Hell no. Throughout history, we've barreled into the unknown, taming fire without fully grasping combustion, battling cancer with incomplete info, shaping crops while barely understanding genetics. We stumble forward, balancing pros and cons, hungry for new powers. Genetic tech will be no different. We already see glimpses in nature of what gene hacking could grant us. Hydras that don't age, eagles' pinpoint vision, gorillas' raw strength, the mantis shrimp's 16-color perception, and who knows what else we haven't even discovered. You might cringe. No way. That's unethical. You can't make decisions for an unborn child. Except we make unilateral decisions for our kids all the time. In 2006, the South Korean government slapped a 10 p.m. curfew on cram schools because kids were being shoved into late-night study marathons by pushy parents, yet the education arms race keeps raging. On the beauty front, Korea's plastic surgery obsession is no secret. By some counts, half the women in their 20s and 30s have gone under the knife. Korean parents often give plastic surgery to their children as a graduation gift. Here's a quote from a Korean college student interviewed by The New Yorker. "All girls get plastic surgery at 19. So if you don't get it done, in a few years, all your friends will look better and you'll look like a worse copy of yourself. Do you think this country won't have genetic modification as soon as it becomes available? Do you really think so?" Picture this dilemma. Your future child eventually realizes you could have boosted their intelligence, height, or looks, but you chose not to. Even if you tried to keep things natural, it wouldn't matter. People with genetically upgraded traits would inevitably dominate the dating scene, having more kids and passing on their superior genes. Look at the worldwide spread of blue eyes. Geneticists suspect all blue-eyed people share a single ancestor about 8,000 years back. Something about blue eyes must have been irresistible. Millions of descendants are proof enough. Now imagine your natural kids surrounded by folks who are unnaturally brilliant and jaw-droppingly gorgeous. What kind of chance would they really have at finding partners or competing in this new gene-obsessed world? And each generation, that gap only widens. Then there's the thornier question of identity. The more modifications parents make, the less that child is truly theirs, biologically speaking. Parents become more like designers. Research projects like Genome Project Right want to go way beyond CRISPR's ability to tweak existing DNA. They aim to raise $100 billion to synthesize entire genomes from scratch, starting small with simpler organisms, eventually working their way up to writing the full human code. That's not editing a book, it's authoring the book of life. In the 1997 film Gattaca, an unmodified man dreams of becoming an astronaut, but his genome reveals he's genetically inferior. Through willpower and cunning, he finally makes it to space in the movie. But ask yourself, in real life, would society ever volunteer to ship an unmodified human on some mega-pricey space mission if we can choose a genetically perfected candidate, resistant to radiation, better at maintaining bone density and zero-G, and overall more likely to succeed? The game is changing, and the stakes go far beyond fiction. While striving for a high level of equality is essential, achieving absolute equality cannot be the ultimate goal. Somewhere in rural Bangladesh, people can buy brand new smartphones dirt cheap, a byproduct of letting the industry expand before insisting on universal access. Had we demanded perfect phone equality from day one, mass production might never have taken off, prices might never have tumbled, and the world's poor would have been left behind. The same dynamic may well apply to gene editing. We can't just freeze scientific progress in the name of equality. Companies like Inscripta want to make CRISPR tech as simple as downloading an app, because they're betting biology is the next big computing platform. DNA the code, CRISPR the programming language. And yes, that's us playing God, except we've been playing God all along in a way. Darwin saw nature as wasteful and cruel, and humans, ambitious and arrogant, have always hammered away at it, pushing the boundaries. If a new technology can be built, we'll build it, end of story. It's hardly shocking, then, that China is charging forward more aggressively than anyone else, launching a huge, multi-billion-dollar plan to dominate precision medicine within 15 years, and to overshadow whatever the rest of the world tries. They're also rolling out universal electronic medical records and making sure data protection rules don't lock out scientists, companies, or the government from these massive databases. Analyzing all that data is beyond normal human or even today's computers. But as supercomputers and AI race ahead, Chinese researchers, and eventually the Chinese government, will start cracking the deep patterns of how genes map to complex traits. That know-how is a huge lever for genetically engineering people, and China's ambition to lead in AI by 2030 sets them up to seize a major advantage in genomics. Meanwhile, the EU has gone in the opposite direction, pushing the strictest data privacy rules on Earth. Their General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, demands explicit consent for any use of genetic data. In other words, where China's forging ahead with minimal constraints, Europe's reticent, guarding personal rights, collecting less data, moving slower. At stake is a colossal geogenetic divide, with the potential to sculpt the future of human biology itself in ways that are still impossible to predict. China has handed itself sweeping rights over its citizens' genetic and personal data, while the European Union does everything possible to restrict such use and prevent a fully fledged genetic police state. Yet understanding the impact of any gene, let alone a cluster of genes, depends on the size and quality of the data set you can examine. More data means clearer insights into how to cure genetic diseases or engineer new traits. Whoever commands the largest, richest genome bank gains the pole position in this genetic revolution, and with that comes prestige, wealth, and power. What's left for the rest of the world? We might fantasize about talking the planet out of genetic modification altogether, but that's a pipe dream. Many nations, like China, are already racing to harness genetics, while other global crises, like climate change, show how staggeringly difficult it is to coordinate any worldwide restraint. Once new genes enter the human population, they spread. There's no putting them back. Blue eyes are a classic example. One lucky mutation some 8,000 years ago bloomed into hundreds of millions of people today. To stop that kind of spread now, you'd have to ban entire populations from traveling or resort to military force. Options no one wants to imagine. And if one big player, say China, embraces advanced gene editing to enhance its population, while another powerhouse like the United States refuses on moral or political grounds, how will that shake out in a century? History suggests the side that refuses game-changing tech quickly becomes irrelevant, even if those who don't will have a long period of trial and error. Therefore, it is unlikely that anyone will want to purposefully abandon the use of gene modification technology. Most likely, the freest countries, where the government will not have a monopoly on genetic editing, will fill the market of gene editing companies in the future. As Jamie Metzl writes, companies and countries that manage to crack the code of diseases such as cancer and a host of others, and learn to understand and potentially modify other human traits, will become more than just a biological version of Google or Alibaba. They will be comparable in power and influence to the Mongols of the 13th century, the British of the 19th century, and the Americans of the 21st century. Let's not kid ourselves. If everyone starts picking the same perfect genes for their edited offspring, we're inviting new disasters. Think about modern smartphones. One or two tech giants dominate, pushing out near-identical devices. Extrapolate that to genes. If the whole world starts stamping out identical sets of optimal traits, our genetic diversity tanks, and in doing so, we gamble big on adaptability. It only takes one unforeseen virus or some other biological curveball, and suddenly nobody has that weird stray mutation that could have saved us. Poof, down goes the human species. Worse yet, our ignorance runs deep. We have no real sense of what random, seemingly useless genes might be delivering hidden evolutionary perks. If our ancestors had had CRISPR, they might have screened out the genetic quirks behind autism because, hey, who needs that for hunting and gathering? They would have had no clue that millennia later, an autistic mind might create Facebook or pioneer entire fields of technology. That's how short-sighted we can be. Evolution's ultra-conservative approach has kept us stable. Everything new, be it whale fins, bat wings, or human hands, sprang from the same fundamental structure. The body plan changes bit by bit, not by rewriting everything from scratch. But once we swagger in with gene editing, we can tear right through that rulebook. Suddenly, the idea that my personality is built from all my life experiences might be a cute fantasy. Genes can predetermine a lot more than we think. And on top of it all, let's admit we've never been shy about practicing eugenics in one form or another. We've selectively bred animals and even castes of humans. Think sumo wrestlers in Japan. Hell, historical infanticide was basically the savage version of a gene filter, discarding infants deemed too weak or deformed. We keep telling ourselves that's archaic and monstrous, then we inch toward the same logic in fancy new ways. The question is whether we can handle that logical endpoint without turning ourselves into an evolutionary monoculture. One perfect design that's also one step away from collective annihilation. It was widely practiced in the Roman Empire. The fourth of the laws of the 12 tables of Roman law stated the following: "A father shall forthwith put to death a son characterized by ugliness or having a form distinct from the human race." In ancient Sparta, city elders personally screened newborns to see that no sick child survived. German tribes, pre-Islamic Arabs, ancient Japanese, Chinese, and Indians all practiced infanticide. Progressive societies might not practice overt infanticide anymore, but they do shape reproductive success in subtler ways. For example, throwing lawbreakers in prison so they're less likely to pass on undesirable traits. We often think human behavior is guided by rational thought, yet evolution rarely rewarded that kind of strict logic. Our genetic heritage cares about just one thing: passing on genes. Reality, logic, and objective truth don't matter, so long as whatever we believe or do ultimately helps those genes survive. Take magical thinking. Psychologist Paul Rosen's experiments show how deeply it controls us, even if we consider ourselves cool-headed. People recoil from drinking juice if they think a sterilized cockroach touched it. Most won't eat from a spotlessly clean chamber pot. This gut-level contamination reaction is a relic of evolution. Ancestors who ignored potential pathogens often died before passing on their genes. Similarly, early primates who didn't freak out at the sight of snake-like sticks, or who didn't seek the safety of riverbanks and fire, likely ended up prey or perished. In the same way, a lot of our instinctive judgments, like a subconscious aversion to someone with 6 fingers, spring from ancient selective pressures. Such quirks aren't rational decisions we made, they're old genetic gambits that once conferred survival or mating advantages. From revulsion at insects in our food to an odd draw toward a comforting campfire glow, these behaviors reflect gene-level priorities honed over millions of years. Listen up. There's nothing objective or rational about a lot of what we do. Most of us refuse to admit that half our actions have zilch to do with so-called free will. And by the way, free will itself is a concept we haven't exactly pinned down. How sure are you that your personality is magically separate from your biology, when your facial features alone can peg your political leanings with 72% accuracy? We're the product of 4 billion years of slow, punishing environmental winnowing. That's how we got so finely tuned. Now we're poised to edit our own genome. Is it really so wise to shove natural selection aside in favor of corporations or governments that can rewrite genes at the push of a button? Or worse, offload the entire job to some AI black box? You can't tell me that's not a slippery slope. Are we going to see generation after generation genetically engineered to cozy up to certain parties or policies? Picture citizens so rabidly loyal you literally cannot sway them. The moment they hear a word against their leaders, they're hit with nausea and vertigo. And that's not even the half of it. Suppose a big biotech giant corners the genetic editing market. Its business is basically pumping out your designed kids. How long before it starts rigging the genome in ways that guarantee its own profits or influence? Even if they didn't stoop that low, how do we define better genes anyway? We've already tossed around higher IQ purely as a stand-in for more happiness. But if your metric is personal satisfaction, you could crank out a population of blissed-out drones who can't even imagine dissent. Would these people even realize generations down the line that they're penned in a gilded cage? That might be just one twisted scenario, but it's enough to make a Pentagon or anyone else sit up and pay attention. We might be sauntering straight into this future, guided by that same ambition that's led us to every major step in history. The question is, will we figure out the price before it's too late? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any new uploads. Support the project by leaving a comment and sharing this video with your friends. Together we can achieve even more.